So again, good evening and thank you for joining us tonight for the Employment Sites Review Community Meeting. As I've said, we're anticipating a larger crowd tonight, so around 160 people have registered for the meeting. So we've just been waiting a couple of minutes before we are actually going to start. There is an icebreaker poll open, which if you'd like to participate in, you can. And the question is, if you had a superpower, which one would it be? So while we're doing that, Christian, could you move to the, can you move to the next slide, Louisa? So for those of you I haven't had the pleasure, just one before that, I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet. My name is Erin Senior, and I will be the facilitator and host for tonight's meeting. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the lands which constitute the present-day City of Mississauga, being part of the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat and Wyandot Nations. We recognize these people and their ancestors as peoples who inhabited these lands since time immemorial. The City of Mississauga is home to many global Indigenous peoples. As a municipality, the City of Mississauga is actively working towards reconciliation by confronting our past and our present, providing space for Indigenous peoples within their territory to recognize and uphold their treaty rights and to support Indigenous peoples. We formally recognize the Anishinaabe origins of our name and continue to make Mississauga a safe place for all Indigenous peoples. So again, thank you all for joining us tonight. I see we've got about 88 people, and if we can move to the next slide. So for those of you who are joining us tonight, again, I want to thank you for joining. If you feel free to participate in the poll while I read out the agenda. I just wanted to say, why are we here tonight? Tonight is the first community meeting to introduce you to the city's employment site review process. And we're here to have a conversation on the future of Smart Centres Meadowvale, or Site 1, of 3 Smart Centres sites that are being considered for changes. For many of you here tonight, the site is an important shopping destination. And we want to talk to you about Smart Centres' proposed changes to the site, the current policy context, and some of the study components and timelines. For those of you joining us over the phone, I'm just going to read over their agenda so you can know what we're going to be going over tonight. So tonight, I'm first going to go over housekeeping like I usually do and just give you an overview of how you can participate in the meeting. Next, we're going to hear opening remarks from Councillor Reid, and following that, we'll hear from Smart Centres, and they will provide some remarks. Then I'm going to introduce our project team, and they will give us a 20-minute presentation. And after the presentation, I'm going to launch 3 live polls. We want to better understand your experience of this site, which will help inform staff final recommendations for this project. And then after that, we're going to have about 45 to 50 minutes for a Q&A before we begin to wrap up the meeting. And I've said this before to some of you, but if we do have a lot of questions tonight, and I do expect we're going to have a fair amount of people joining us, we're going to extend the meeting for an extra 15 minutes if we need to, just so we can address as many questions as we can. So with that, let me just quickly check our numbers to make sure we've got everybody. So we've got about 88 people on right now. I'm just going to close the Slido poll and see what we've got here. And let's see. Thanks, guys. And then we're going to move on to the next slide. So for those of you joining us tonight, tonight's session is going to be recorded. And there is a closed captioning option if you need. If you go to the bottom left of your screen, there's a CC button. If you click on that, closed captioning will pop up and you'll be able to use that throughout the meeting. Our general participation guidelines for meetings are: thank you for contributing actively, equitably, and respectfully throughout the meeting. If we can go to the next slide, that would be great. And this is essentially how you're going to be able to chat with us. So as I've stated, we've got about 15 minutes for our Q&A. So 50 minutes for the Q&A. And as you know, and many of you have been on meetings with me before, we've discovered that the most fruitful conversations come from being able to hear what you have to say, the questions, the comments, and the responses. So because of this, I ask that you save your questions until we have that Q&A. Although I do know not everybody is comfortable asking a question. Sometimes it becomes problematic. So we do have the chat function. So if you do want to, you can pose your comments and questions in the chat. We don't address questions in the chat though. We save that until the Q&A, and then I'm going to take a break and I will address some of the questions that you've put in the chat to staff, and that will be that opportunity for staff to ask them. I do a first come, first serve questions. So if you've got a question, raise your hand. I'll note down your name. And then when it's time for you to speak, I'll say your name. So-and-so is up next. I'll ask you to unmute yourself. You can unmute yourself and talk. And it's almost like a little bit of a radio talk show where you'll ask your question and then staff will respond to it. For those of you who are joining us by phone, you're going to press *3 to raise your hand and then *6 to unmute yourself. And then again, I will call on you to ask your question. Because we do have a fair amount of people joining us tonight, I'm going to ask if you can limit your questions to about 1 question per person. And then we can get through all the questions and comments. I know that's something that we're working on trying to do better during these meetings. Okay, so if we can move to the next slide, please. We do have technical help on here. So if any of you are experiencing at any point in time technical issues hearing WebEx, yes, it's true, Greg, you can't unmute yourself. I will ask you to unmute yourself, and then once it does that, then we'll give you that permission to unmute yourself. You can either call Amina, and I'm going to say this out loud for those of you who are joining us over the phone. No problem, Greg. It's 905-615-3200, extension 4473. So you can give her a shout if you're having any issues, or you can always email Trista at trista.james@mississauga.ca, and they're going to assist you to the best of their abilities. And I'll ask Brandon if you can just add that to the chat right now so you guys can see that in the chat if you need to scroll up and remember, oh, right, okay, there's some technical help here. You can always just message in the chat like, I need help, and then Brandon will put those numbers in there for you to call as well. Okay, now we're getting through. The next slide that we've got is another poll. And so before we start the meeting, it's always good to get a sense of who's joining us tonight. I know many of you can't see one another, but we're going to be able to hear one another. So I'm just going to launch another poll now, and it's called Who's in the Room? So this one, when I launch it, what you can do is you can say, I'm a resident, or I'm a landowner, or I visit this site frequently, I'm a business owner here. Feel free to just type in who you are, and then we'll get a sense of who will be joining us tonight. So the poll has launched. Great, we've got like resident Aaron, urban planning enthusiast, Mississauga staff, Ward 9 resident, wonderful. So I'll just leave that open for a little bit, and then we can go to the next slide. So I'd like to actually introduce the councillor. He's going to be with us tonight. We're very lucky to have him, and he'll be providing some opening remarks for us. So councillor, if you'd like to take it away and provide us with your opening remarks.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I just want to say, Aaron, thank you, and to your project team. You've done a great job, and it's been exciting to talk about this and to plan it out. And I know there's some people here in the chat. I just want to acknowledge David Rackman, so representing Ward 10, and some of our Ward 10 residents. I'd recognize some names from the chat. So welcome to all you people, because you are right next door to us, to our Ward 9 people and the site specifically. So thank you for joining us. I know Pat Stato's in the chat as well, so hopefully we'll get a chance to hear from her in the Q&A a little bit later. And most importantly, Monica and Michelle, our team, our office team from Ward 9, who are answering your questions over the past few weeks related to this. What we're doing tonight is interactive, and Aaron's doing a great job of giving us so many different ways to ask questions and interact. So let's have fun with this, and just don't feel like you have a dumb question. Don't feel like you want to save time by asking your question later. Someone may have the same question and just are too shy to throw it out there. So please just ask your questions, and let's answer some of these questions at this point. The three main things I want as a little takeaway from my opening remarks is this is a time, one, to be interactive, two, to listen, hear what they have to say, and understand this process. Maybe even learn a little bit about how this process works at this point, and we can all learn together. And lastly, start to think about what the legacy can be from this. A lot of the people who are in this meeting tonight have lived in this area for a long time. have seen the different projects come and go, and you're still here. So maybe start to think about this in terms of, if you can get your input into this process, we get a chance to leave a legacy for the next generation of people who are living in Ward 9. And this is why we're doing this. We could easily just let you know what's happening and not engage you, but we are so early in the process right now simply because we want your voice to be heard. And it's not a cliche. We're early in the game for that very reason, so that all the input that you provide, the insights you get, the inside information, because you live close to the site that we don't get from doing our studies and our drive-bys. We need that to inform this whole project. So we it's not just that your voice matters. We are really depending on the interaction that we get from tonight to really steer this in the proper way. So thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to hand that back over to you, Erin.
Thank you, Counselor. Lucy, if we can move to the next slide, that'd be great. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we do have a representative from Smart Centres here, and we thought we'd give Victoria an opportunity just to introduce herself and to give a little bit of opening remarks before I will introduce Christian and Roman, and we'll get into the presentation. So Victoria, it's up to you now.
Thanks, Erin, and thanks, Councillor Reid, for joining us tonight, and thanks to all of you for coming out to kick off this study. As Erin mentioned, my name is Victoria. I'm a development manager with Smart Centres. So we're here tonight to ask everyone to think about the future of the Meadowvale Shopping Centre and how it can best serve the community. We're not here with a development proposal, but we're here to start the conversation with you, the community, the city, and the region about what Meadowvale can look like and how it can best serve all of you today, tomorrow, and 20 years from now. Today, Meadowvale serves the retail needs of the community. But as we've all seen over the past few years, the nature of retail is changing. We have some major vacancies on the site and a vast sea of parking. We also have city and regional transit at our doorstep. We have the GO Station across the street, My Way and Zoom stop on the site with routes to Cooksville, Shoppers World, Sheridan College. We also know there's a housing shortage in Ontario. In short, the site is not operating at its highest and best use, and it's well positioned to respond to the transit investments that have been made in this area, as well as provincial targets to get more housing to Ontarians. For all these reasons, we've submitted this request for conversion of the lands from employment to community uses. As Christian and the city will elaborate in their presentation, this is not a privately initiated application. It's a reaction to the city and the region and city's official plan review, which is the only time that we as owners can make this kind of request, and it only comes around every 5 or 10 years. So in order for us to plan for the future, we really need to start today. The Meadowvale Shopping Centre is designated employment, and for those of you who've been to the site know it's not your typical employment site with heavy industrial or warehouses or even office. It's a retail site and it serves a community function. We want to build on that. As Christian goes through his presentation today, I ask that you just keep this in mind. Smart Centres has been part of this community for over 20 years. We're known for delivering retail within the communities we operate, and we want to continue to do so. In order for that to happen, we really need to think about the future of the site and bringing a more diverse range of uses and users to support that retail that's on the site, whether that's more employment uses like offices, community spaces, parks, and of course, residential. At the end of the day, retail is at the core of our business, and our ask today is not to get rid of it. Our ask is also thoughtfully limited to a portion of the site. We recognize this is a good retail site. It's just a little oversized for today's market. Like our sites, we're evolving as a company from offering shopping centers to developing complete communities with a diverse offering of uses. So that we can continue to serve the needs of the neighborhoods we're part of. So keep that in mind. We really look forward to continuing this discussion, and we're here to work with the community. So with that, again, thank you for your time, and I'll pass it back to you, Erin.
Thanks, Victoria. So then I would like to introduce, and I'm just going to close our poll here. So thank you for all of you who let us know who you are today that will be joining us. I'd like to introduce the project team. Christian is a professional planner and has been at the city since 2019. He has He has experience leading community area policy and zoning bylaw reviews and is the city's lead for this project. Previously, he was a planner with Peel Public Health, where he led an initiative to positively influence the design of communities to promote walkability and healthy design. And he holds a Master's of Urban Planning from McGill University. Roman has been with the city for over 27 years. In his most recent position, he is the principal planner with Planning and Development Division. He's worked on growth management aspects of the regional official plan, and he's a project manager on the regional side for the employment site review. And most importantly, he is a resident of Mississauga. So with all that, I'm now going to turn it over to Christian. He's going to have a 20-minute presentation for us to review. And then we're going to have our opportunity to have a conversation, have our polls, have that interaction that the councillor was talking about.
Okay, thank you, Erin, for that introduction, and good evening, everyone. So as Erin mentioned, my name is Christian Bennett, and I am a planner with the City of Mississauga, and I'm helping to lead the city's employment sites review project. And tonight we are starting a conversation on the future of the Smart Centres Meadowvale site, or site one of 3 Smart Centres sites that are being considered for changes. We know for many of you here tonight, this site is an important shopping destination, and we want to talk to you about Smart Centres' proposed changes for the site, the current policy context, the study that is now underway, and timelines and next steps for the project. So next slide, please. So in concrete terms, we're discussing a proposal from Smart Centres to remove 3 of their sites from employment areas that are identified in the region's official plan. And for the non-planners in the room here tonight, an official plan is essentially the planning document that plans for growth over a longer term planning horizon, and it guides a municipality's planning decisions. Now, we call removing a site from an employment area an employment conversion. You'll hear me use this name throughout the presentation tonight. And what do we mean by an employment conversion? Well, essentially, an employment conversion, in succinct terms, could open the door to a broader mix of uses on the site that includes sensitive uses such as residential that are not permitted in employment areas. Now, Smart Centres made their request in 2022 when the region was finalizing a new official plan. They presented high-level concepts for mixed-use development that not only included sensitive uses such as residential, but also showed a mix of commercial and retail uses that they would like to see continue on the site, all within a walkable design. With that information in mind, Regional Council determined that further study was warranted. They wanted to learn more about the sites and the proposals, and directed the region and the city to work together to evaluate these sites and report back by December of this year on findings and recommendations for next steps. So in the meantime, all 3 sites were kept in an employment area when Regional Council adopted their new official plan in April 2022. And that means for the current time, sensitive uses such as residential are not permitted. So next slide, please. We recognize that planning is complicated, especially at such a high level stage of the planning process. So we wanted to take this opportunity to walk you through the planning process when it comes to employment conversions. We are here tonight because both the region and the city have a role to play in land use planning. Starting with the region, they set out high-level policy direction for growth that's required by the province. Some of their responsibilities include delivering critical infrastructure, so your water and wastewater pipes, for example. They also designate areas for employment that do not permit, again, sensitive uses such as residential. Now, taking a site out of an employment area requires a process. The region sets out conversion criteria to help guide that process. And I'm going to touch on that criteria in more detail later on in my presentation. So next slide, please. So when you get to the city level, you see a bit more detail and direction in terms of policies. The city takes the region's policies, translates it into direction for development, and really provides the land use policies that guide how a site may be used. So it's not till you get to the city level that we get a better sense of the exact mix of land uses that are permitted on a site. And you can kind of see that difference when you compare this map to the previous slide. There's a more granular level of detail and even more colors that represent different land use designations. The city also provides infrastructure and services. So for example, MyWay bus service, local roads. Both the region and the city have their own planning documents that are again called official plans, and they contain the policies based on those roles and responsibilities. So next slide, please. And finally, you have the third player, the property owner. And really the property owner can make requests to change an official plan, which are then evaluated by the region and the city, depending which plan that request is made to and decided upon by respective councils. So it is the property owner that takes the policies of the region and the city and then who are responsible for developing their property. So next slide, please. In summary, each party plays an important role in how a site gets built and developed. The region is the approval authority for employment conversions, while the City of Mississauga sets out the land use permissions for a site. The property owner then develops and builds their site based on those policies. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'd like to take the opportunity really to describe the present context of the site. It is quite large. It comprises approximately 26 hectares. It is located in an area of the city called the Meadowvale Business Park Corporate Center, which is of course an employment area. When you look around the site, it has the protected Parkway Belt West corridor along the western edges of the site. It has homes to the south on the other side of the CP railway main line. It has retail and commercial uses along the eastern edges of Winston Churchill Boulevard. And of course, Highway 401 is located to the north. Now, as you move further west and east, you do see heavier employment uses. So you see warehouses, pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies, automobile repair shops, and more. Now, as Victoria mentioned, the extent of Smart Center's request does not extend across the entirety of the site. And you can see the extent on the slide in front of you. It's represented by a hatching overlay. Next slide, please. The site is well connected by transit. It has connections to downtown Toronto to the east and Milton to the west, with the Milton GO line that, of course, as of yet, does not have two-way all-day GO service, but it does have train service during the peak hours. There are several MyWay bus routes, and there's even a Brampton Zoom bus service that connects the site up Winston Churchill Boulevard along Steeles to Sheridan College and the Huron-Ontario Light Rail Transit line that is currently under construction. So next slide. As for the types of land uses on the site, I'm sure most of you know the site quite well. It's really a mix of commercial and retail stores. You have a Walmart, for example, a HomeSense, a Sleep Country Canada, banks, a dentist office, an LCBO, and really quite a number of restaurants. However, the site itself does not contain industrial manufacturing uses, and those are uses that, you know, from our perspective, typically warrant separation from nearby residential areas. So next slide, please. So here I want to use this opportunity to really describe the purpose for employment areas and why we have employment areas in the region's official plan. The city's employment areas provide land for diverse employment uses that are needed to meet the current and future economic needs of the city. They're intended generally for heavier employment uses, such as a manufacturing plant or warehouse, and to help secure their viability and reduce potential for conflict. Though employment areas do not permit uses that are considered sensitive. So, for example, residential, schools, or daycare uses. On the other hand, we have non-employment areas that the region calls community areas. Now, of course, the list of land uses here is different. They can include sensitive land uses such as residential and schools, but they can also have lighter employment uses such as office. They can have commercial and retail uses. And those uses can also be mixed on a site. So where you have more than one use, perhaps within the same building. By removing a site from the employment area, what you're doing is you're essentially allowing for a development that includes sensitive land uses, but you also take away generally permissions for heavier employment uses that should be located in employment areas. So through this process, we are assessing essentially whether Site 1 is more appropriately located in employment in a community area. It is currently in an employment area, but it contains uses that could be integrated as part of a future mixed-use development. And in fact, you've heard from Smart Centers that really their proposed vision for the site would be for a mix of uses that not only includes housing types and tenures, but also community amenities, commercial and retail uses, and potentially office uses as well. So next slide, please. Now, as Mississauga grows, there may be sites that can be better utilized with other land uses than they were originally intended. As I mentioned earlier, there are policy documents that set out how to consider changes to land use. And through this review, we need to address those criteria that have been established in the plans of the province, the region, and Mississauga. Now, I find it's useful to pose questions to, I guess, more generally describe what we're looking at with these criteria. So you can ask questions, for example, what are the potential impacts to surrounding industries and manufacturers if sensitive uses such as residential are introduced closer to their properties? What is the current situation with these sites? Do they have a high vacancy rate? And do they have uses that are important for surrounding businesses and the community? Is there a need for the conversion, or should the site perhaps continue with a broader range of employment uses? And what are the overall impacts of introducing those new uses on infrastructure and services in the area, such as roads, schools, and parks? Next slide, please. In order to undertake this assessment, we are launching a study. It has 4 components. You can see those 4 components on the slide in front of you: a land use and compatibility analysis, an economic analysis, an infrastructure analysis, and of course, a public engagement component. So I'll now describe each of these 4 components over the next few slides. There are 2 aspects to the land use component. Firstly, we will consider the need for more housing, and in particular, affordable housing, and the potential for a different mix of uses on the site that may include sensitive uses such as residential. Secondly, we have retained a consultant to complete a compatibility study for the area. The purpose for this study is really to get a better sense of the potential impacts to nearby businesses if sensitive land uses are permitted on the site. So the province has minimum distance guidelines between heavier employment uses and residential uses to really mitigate impacts. And allowing residential here may impact the future operations of those businesses if they now fall within that minimum range. And through this component, we want to better understand those impacts. So we will consider air, noise, odor, and vibration impacts from those businesses as part of this study. Next slide. The economic analysis component will consider the role of the site and what role it plays for surrounding businesses and the community. We want to get a better sense or understanding of the existing conditions on the site and the surrounding employment area. This will help us in determining the need for the employment conversion. We will also be evaluating employment and economic trends to better understand how the site can contribute to the economic future of Mississauga. If you can please move to the next slide. The infrastructure analysis component will evaluate potential or possible impacts on existing infrastructure, as well as the potential need to expand infrastructure beyond what is currently planned, should the site be redeveloped with a mix of uses that includes residential. We have identified three general categories. Transportation category that will consider impacts on roads, transit service, active transportation, and of course, goods movement. An underground infrastructure category that addresses your underground utilities, the water, wastewater, and stormwater pipes, for example. And a community infrastructure category that will consider the need for more community infrastructure, including, for example, emergency services, schools, parks, libraries, daycares, and other community facilities. Now, public engagement is absolutely a key component of this project. We are very much in the early days of this process, and we want to ensure that we hear from different voices around the table. We have 2 rounds of engagement planned. We're in the first round, which we see as an opportunity for us to introduce the project, the study process to the community, and hear your initial thoughts. The second round will then follow, where we will have more findings and recommendations to share. And we are planning to host those meetings in late summer or even early fall. During both rounds of engagement, we are holding community meetings, such as this one, but we are also having targeted engagement, particularly with industries. So next slide, please. Yep. So here you can see the proposed timelines for the project. We're in the first phase. During the first 2 phases, the city and the region are working together. During phase 1, we have developed a study approach and process to evaluate the 3 sites. We are also beginning public engagement. So the idea is, again, to have public input before we draft our recommendations. During phase 2, this is where we do the actual homework, the in-depth evaluation of each of the 3 sites based on the components I mentioned earlier. And then the results of that work will be synthesized and presented to the community as part of a second round of engagement, along with draft recommendations on next steps. For phase 3, further refinement of recommendations will likely occur based on everything we've heard to date. We will then present our recommendations to Mississauga councillors at Planning and Development Committee for their consideration before those recommendations and those findings are forwarded to the region. And then that brings us to the final phase, where regional staff will present their recommendations on next steps to Regional Council. This is, after all, a regional process. Regional Council will then decide whether to move forward with an amendment to the official plan to remove 1 or more of the 3 sites from the region's employment area.
Smartphone with you. I know those of you who are on the phone already, I'll just say this out loud, but if you have your smartphone with you and you haven't already registered for the project, please take it out, go to the QR code, and then you can sign up. You can sign up for updates on the site. So that's really important because we will be having a future engagement. So we want to make sure that you're there participating in them. Also, as I've mentioned before, Christian's the project lead on the city side for this. And so he's happy to take calls, happy to field your questions again, and we'll put his information into the chat so that you can contact him. His information is also on the project website. I wanted to thank Victoria for being here. Her information is in the chat right now. And for those of you who are joining us over the phone, Victoria's information, her phone number is 905-326-6400-7530. And she's the Smart Center rep. So if there's any questions, or those of you who are joining us who might own businesses in the area, please feel free to direct some of your questions to her. Again, if you're joining us over the phone and you'd like to get in contact with Christian, his phone number is 905-615-3200, extension 5735. So with this, folks, I want to thank you again for the comments, the questions. This was our initial kickoff meeting. I hope that we see you and see your comments and questions coming in through our website, and that you participate in our upcoming meeting that we'll have. I want to thank the counselor for his opening remarks. I think that was really great, just to set the stage that this is about this engagement that we're going to have. I'd like to acknowledge Pat Said, who's on the call tonight. Again, thank you for joining the call and being here and your questions as well. For the Region of Peel for being here and for answering questions. And then again, for Smart Centers for participating in this. And again, of course, for Christian for leading us through this process. I appreciate all the work that has been done. We've just put in the chat right now. There's going to be another meeting on Tuesday, April 11th. This is again for Ward 6. It's from 6 to 7:30 p.m. and it's the employment site review discussion for site 2 and 3, which are just along Burnham Thorpe. So again, if you're just interested in learning about this process a little bit more, hearing again, you're happy to join that meeting as well. The counselor's information is in the chat as well. If you want to get in touch with him, it's 905-896-5900. If you can move to the next slide then. So again, thank you all for your participation tonight, for participating in the polls. Those of you who weren't able to, I'm sorry, sometimes Slido glitches a little bit, but we heard a really good feedback from you all tonight. We collect all that feedback. Christian gets that. He uses that through his analysis as well as with other input that he's got as he's starting to make these recommendations going forward. Again, thank you again for everything. I hope you're not shy and you reach out to us. We will have a recording of the staff presentation available on the website at a later date. And then we will also have a summary of this discussion that we've had. We'll put up, it's like a what we've heard report that will also be available at the later date. And when you sign up for the project website, you'll get notification when those are available. And the presentation will also be available for you to review too. So I hope everyone had a great night. Thank you again for your participation, and we hope to see you soon. All the best. Take care. I'm now going to close the meeting.